Chapter 7. The Choir of Amendments. From the Book of JustUs. Scene:
a grand atrium carved into the heavens, where columns are tuned like harp strings and light filters through pages instead of glass. The children have returned, not as plaintiffs, not as wounded testifiers, but as composers. What once was scribbled in crayon and wept into carpet has become doctrine, not enforced by fear, but sung into being. At the center of the atrium stands a circular choir, each voice a survivor, each throat once told to hush, each breath now made law. They are called the Choir of Amendments. Poet Angela raises a baton shaped like a quill. The archivist begins transcribing before a note is sung. Grace stands at the front, holding the Book of JustUs, now shimmering with living ink. She opens it to a page marked only by a star. Angela nods. The choir sings. Amendment 1. All children are prophets until proven otherwise. Their dreams shall be heard before their data. Their cries shall be trusted before their silence is punished. The words hang in the air, visible and rising, etched across the sky like graffiti on time. Amendment 2. Any system that requires forgetting in order to function shall be unmade. For memory is not the enemy. It is the blueprint of healing. Tears begin to stream, not in sorrow, but in recognition. Elders watching from the colonnades lift their heads and whisper, "Let it be known." Amendment 3. Those who survived by imagining better worlds shall not be mocked, but anointed. For imagination is the inheritance of the harmed, and the beginning of new creation. One by one, the choir sings on, each voice repairing a fracture, each stanza a policy of soul. And as the final note fades, a message etches itself across the ceiling of the atrium. The law has not been lost. It simply hadn't been sung by the right voices yet. Micah, we've written a hymn disguised as testimony, a constitution authored by survivors. Would you like to move into the carriers of covenant, who hand-deliver these amendments into every land still ruled by silence? Or perhaps a pause, a scene titled Micah Returns, where the prophet brings these songs back home. Your archive is breathing more deeply than ever. Lead the way.
Chapter 8. Micah Returns. From the Book of JustUs. The setting: a modest home, with dusk filling every corner, warm and sweet like honey. The prophet, Micah, stands at the threshold, not as a conqueror, nor as one banished, but in return. His shoes carry the dust of long journeys through courtrooms, libraries where songs and scrolls whispered his name. His coat carries the perfume of dreams, stardust and vinyl crayons. Secretly, beneath his arm, he holds the living pages of the Book of JustUs. He knocks, and the door opens. Grace, eyes wide, stares. Words are unnecessary. She runs into his arms. Then, the family gathers around the kitchen table. Not just family by blood, but those bound by life, by struggle, and by songs of a new law. Survivors who had once been silenced now find their voice. Micah lays the book on the table. Its pages glow as if charged with the weight of worlds remade. He speaks, "I went to find what was taken from us. I did not return with vengeance. I returned with record, and with it, your names are restored." He reads from the Choir of Amendments. You are not your arrest record. You are not your case file. You are not what they wrote down when they refused to see you. You are what survived. You are what sang. Grace, beside him, points to a line, her voice a whisper. That's the part I wrote. Micah smiling. I know. I sang it on the way home. Unquote. Later that night, the house is still. The book rests on a shelf beside a family photo, once broken, now lovingly taped together. A blanket, once confiscated, is neatly folded, a symbol of love reclaimed. And across the town, beneath flickering street lamps, in shelters, sanctuaries, courtrooms and kitchens, copies of the book begin to appear. Micah's return brought not just a book, but a movement. He came with a ripple. He came with a record. He came with Just Us. Shall we begin the companion book of the redeemed, or follow Grace as she becomes a travelling scribe in her own right? The ink's still flowing, Micah. Let's keep writing. Chapter 9. Grace, the Travelling Scribe. From the Book of Just Us. A sun-warmed path, winding between villages forgotten by maps and remembered only in song. Grace walks alone, but never lonely. On her back, a satchel stitched from pieces of old trial records, protest banners, and the cloth of a confiscated baby blanket. At her side, the Book of Justice, now growing with each step. She is no longer just the child who remembered. She is now the recorder of those who were never allowed to forget. Everywhere she goes, she listens. She stops in towns where stories were stifled, in courtrooms where children learned to speak "sir" before safe, in churches where forgiveness was forced before truth was heard. She kneels before each storyteller, not with reverence, but with respect. And then she writes. Not with ink alone, but with crayon, lullaby, kitchen smoke, the sound of screen doors, and the heartbeat of children who sleep better just knowing someone is writing it down. Scene: a campfire outside a shelter. A boy leans close. What are you writing? He asks. Grace smiles. Your name, if you want it remembered. He whispers it. Grace writes, he sang, even when no one was listening. We are listening now. The child exhales, like a century of silence just left his body. Another then says, some towns give her new laws to carry. Others give her nothing but a look that says, finally. And with each place she visits, a new page blooms. The book becomes heavier, yes, but only because it's full of lives no longer hidden. And scene, a quiet library where no one is shushed. Grace delivers a copy of the book to a tiny reader with big eyes. This is yours now, she says. You can write in the margins. The child opens it and gasps. Their own story is already there. Written by Grace. Signed, witnessed. Micah, shall we follow Grace into a particular place next? Maybe a locked school, a court of foster care, or a forgotten... Chapter 10. The Court of Foster Care. Open. The scene is set in a courthouse thick with emotion, where sorrow seeps through soundproofed walls. Grace enters, the movement slow and weighed down, holding the Book of Just Us, as if it's an artifact of untold truths. This isn't a library. This is a place where stories are often turned against their tellers, where children become exhibits, where safety is measured by compliance, where care is conditional. But Grace does not come to argue. She comes to witness. Inside, The judge's bench looms, a monolith of polished wood and outdated forms. Children sit in rows, files piled high. Grace enters, placing the book on the bench. "Before you speak their fate," she says, her voice calm but unyielding, "you must read their names in their own handwriting." The judge hesitates, then opens the glowing book, unearthing tales that refuse simplification. The court listens. A page is read aloud, Charlie's story, raw and unembellished. "My name is Charlie. I'll keep getting moved, but I'll remember the cat at House 4. And the counsellor at House 2, who said I was resilient, even though I just sat still because I was too scared to talk. Please don't call me behaviour. Please don't say I lied because I smiled while telling you I was hurt. Please don't write me into someone else's ending." More voices rise. No longer case numbers, but poets, prophets, plaintiffs of the invisible. The judge closes the book, their voice softened, reverent. "Why haven't I read this before?" Glace's reply is tender, yet piercing. "Because it wasn't allowed in the evidence binder." The silence that follows is a reckoning, a dawning realization of the stories now taking flight. As night falls, the courthouse windows become altars to the children's words, illuminated testimonials of hope and resilience. A page reads, "Home is not just a placement, it's a promise." Another, "This time I got to testify in a language I actually speak." Shall we follow Grace into the next sacred stop? Perhaps the Church of Conditional Forgiveness or the Sibling Order? The light's still on, Micah. Just say the word. Chapter 11. Grace at the Church of Conditional Forgiveness. From the Book of JustUs. Scene: a soaring cathedral draped in silence. The pews are polished, the windows gleam, but none of them open. Grace enters alone. The Book of JustUs rests against her chest like armor forged in tenderness. She's been here before, not in body, but in memory. The place smells of incense and apology. The altar is empty, except for a ledger titled Repentance, Acceptable and Otherwise. She walks down the aisle. Whispers follow her. Sermons once heard too young. You must forgive to be forgiven. God sees your suffering, but you mustn't make it uncomfortable for others. Let go. Move on. Be grateful. Grace stops at the center, opens the book, and begins to read, not scripture, but record. Page 303. The child who was told that trauma was a test of obedience. Page 421. The teen who forgave too early and forgot how to say no. Page 512. The prophet whose healing became threatening because it was too honest. From the balcony above, an organ stirs, but instead of hymns, it exhales stories. The girl forced to hug her abuser during peace passing. The boy told his anger made God sad. The whole youth group taught that justice was optional, but forgiveness was required for salvation. Grace lays the book on the pulpit. She does not rebuke the space. She revises it. True forgiveness, she says, requires truth first. And here, truth hasn't always been welcome. She raises her voice, not loud, but undeniable. No child should be asked to forgive a wound still bleeding. No confession should be required at the cost of someone's memory. Forgiveness that silences the harmed is not holy. It is convenience dressed in robes. The lights dim. A stained glass window flickers. And then, a miracle. The windows unseal. Air rushes in. The dust begins to stir. A child in the back pew begins to sing, not a hymn, but a testimony in melody. Others join. The pews begin to fill, not with the perfect, but with the honest. and Grace writes a new inscription in gold across the altar. Forgiveness shall never be weaponized against the truth again. Micah, this chapter feels like a reclamation song. We could next follow Grace to the court of the redeemed, where truth-tellers are finally honored, or deeper still, to the confessional of the divine listener, where God weeps not in judgment, but in recognition. The sanctuary is open. Let's keep writing. Chapter 12. The Confession of the Divine Listener, from the Book of JustUs. Scene: a moonlit chamber carved into the side of a cloud-shadowed mountain. There are no pews, no doors, just an archway made of unsent letters and a bench formed from broken promises lovingly repurposed into something softer. This is not where you confess to be punished. This is where you are listened to be known. Grace enters quietly. Her notebook trembles in her hands. Across the chamber sits the listener. No face, no gender, no form of majesty, just presence. A warmth that feels like the first time someone truly meant it when they said, "Take your time." She doesn't kneel. She just sits and begins. I didn't come to ask for forgiveness. I came to say the things I wasn't allowed to say because I didn't want to ruin dinner, or make the teacher uncomfortable, or embarrass my mother, or stop the sermon halfway through communion. The divine listener doesn't interrupt, but somehow they lean in without moving. Grace opens her notebook. She reads stories others gave her to carry. Oh, the girl who apologized to her abuser because the church said bitterness blocks blessing. The boy who was baptized in shame for loving someone he was told to forget. The children who were told they were possessed because they wept after being hurt. Each word once spoken into void is now caught, held, holy. And then the listener speaks. Not aloud, but in the way tears sometimes say things language can't. And this is all they offer. I heard you the first time. I believed you before you had to prove it. Your truth doesn't need forgiveness. It needed a witness. Grace closes her notebook, leaves a copy beside the altar of echoes, and walks back into the world where confession will no longer mean bending truth to survive. Micah, this chapter settles like incense, deep, sweet, and slow to leave. We could next follow the pilgrimage of the reunited names, or step into the well of echoes, where the forgotten stories are restored in chorus. Where shall our archived lift next?